Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your Innkeeper, and today we'll be talking about low-level Divine Soul Sorcerer spells. I want to take a moment and thank all of my patrons. Thank you guys. If you like this channel and if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon. The link will be in the video description down below. For this video, I'm only going to talk about spells on the Cleric spell list. For those that are also on the Sorcerer list, check out my Sorcerer spells videos, which are going to be in the video description. I'm also only going to talk about what I think are the best Metamagic options for each one, not every single Metamagic that works with that spell individually. Something I failed to mention in this series is that all of my Sorcerer analysis is based on single class characters, including this video. Analyzing Sorcerers in the context of multi-class would be too broad of a scope, and I'd have to make this series over 100 videos long, and I definitely don't want to do that. Before I start, I want to state the obvious. Everything in this video is my opinion. If you disagree, that's totally fine, and I encourage disagreement and discussion. Just try not to get triggered or offended by my opinions. More than likely, I don't know you, so when I say that I hate a spell that you absolutely love, I'm not personally attacking you. This video intends to analyze each spell as it applies to a single class Divine Soul Sorcerer, not the spell in a vacuum as a whole. Because of this, you'll notice that I'll disapprove of certain spells that might be considered top tier for clerics. It doesn't mean I think this spell is terrible, just that it may be great for a cleric but not so great for a sorcerer, whose role in a group and general playstyle is very different than that of a cleric. Overall, there are 4 Metamagic options I would highly recommend for Divine Soul Sorcerer casting level 1 through 3 spells: Twin Spell, Distance Spell, Subtle Spell, and to a lesser extent, Quicken Spell. Most low-level cleric spells have terrible range, so Distance Spell is a very good choice here, especially since I think the ideal range for a sorcerer to be away from a melee is about 90 feet. There are also some great single-target spells at low levels, making Twin Spell a bargain at 1 sorcery point for a first-level spell. Subtle Spell is always good, but the Cleric spell list has a lot of spells with only verbal components, which makes Subtle Spell even better. Quicken Spell is usually always good and still good with the Divine Soul, but the Cleric spell list at low levels has a lot of great bonus action spells already, so you get less from Quickened, especially if you take Spiritual Weapon. The first group of spells that I want to talk about are the buff spells. At level 1, the only buff spell I'd recommend is Bless, but damn, is it a good spell. Bless gives your allies a bonus, so anyone within the range gets to add a d4 to any attack or saving throw that they make for the duration of the spell, as long as you're concentrating on it. So, of course, Bless, Quickened is a really good metamagic here because you're mostly going to be casting Bless in combat, and quickening it will make it a bonus action, freeing up your action to do something else. I also would recommend Distance Spell because it expands the range from 30 feet to 60 feet. This impacts this spell tremendously because if your allies are far away from you, not only can you affect more allies, but you can affect allies that normally the spell wouldn't have been able to affect because they might have been too far away from you. Bless is a great spell, one of the best cleric spells for first level, so I highly recommend that you take this spell. For level 2, for buff spells, there's 2 spells that I'd recommend, and the first one is Calm Emotions. For this one, I think it's a really good spell. Some people think it's circumstantial, but when I've taken this spell, I found that I've used it a lot more than I thought that I would. You can use it in social interactions to soothe down an angered guard or an angered shopkeeper, or anyone for that matter who might be about to become hostile, and you can end a combat before it begins. But you can also use this to help your allies who have been affected by effects like fear. So really versatile spell, and I do highly recommend it. For this one, Quicken Spell, if you're using it in combat, is always going to be good. Of course, Distance Spell boosts the range from 60 foot to 120 feet. An Extended Spell outside of combat would boost the duration from 1 minute to 2 minutes, and normally I'd say that's not that good, but in a social situation, I think using a spell like Calm Emotions really can benefit from that extra minute duration. So I think that Extended Spell actually can work pretty well here. The other spell I'd recommend for second level is Enhance Ability. It buffs your allies with exactly what it says, enhancing an ability. So you can actually boost your allies and help them succeed where they normally would have failed. This one you can twin, which is great because it normally affects one creature, and now you'd be affecting two creatures and boosting their ability scores. This can come in real handy in exploration and social situations. You can also use Extended Spell to boost the duration. Quicken Spell I don't think is so good in this unless you happen to be using this in combat. And of course Distance Spell can come in handy. For level 3 buff spells, there's only one I'd recommend, and that is Beacon of Hope. Beacon of Hope boosts your healing tremendously. Distance Spell boosts the range from 30 feet to 60 feet, and it extends the affected area. So therefore, the possible number of characters that you can affect is boosted by that. And once you cast Beacon of Hope, all of your healing spells are going to basically heal at their maximum, which is fantastic. I really like this spell a lot. And I did make a video for it, so check it out. It'll be linked in the video description. Also, Quicken Spell I think is really handy for this spell. So if you happen to have taken Quicken Spell, this is a good spell to cast it on, because then you can be doing something else with your action. And Extended Spell maybe could be useful because it'll extend the duration from 1 minute to 2 minutes. So what you can do with the Extended Spell is cast Beacon of Hope for a combat so you can maximize healing during the combat, and usually the fight will be over before the 1 minute expiration, and then you can keep concentrating on it by having extended it and do your after combat healing and still get your maximum benefit from it. As you can see, there are overall some really good buffs at low levels. The real standout here is Bless. You're going to use this and it remains good all throughout your adventuring career. Bless is a spell that once you take it, I don't recommend you ever replace, and you'll probably benefit from it over and over and over. So definitely consider taking that spell. The next group of spells I wanted to talk about are control spells. So for level 1, there's only one that I'd recommend, and that is Command. So Command allows you to basically stop a creature from doing either attacking or doing whatever it is that they wanted to do, and commanding them to do something else. In this case, Twin Spell would really come in handy because command affects one creature. If you Twin Spell it, now you can command two creatures to do the action. Now, this is something that I would say you'd want to ask your Dungeon Master how they want it to work. Can you issue two different commands to each creature, or do both creatures have to obey the same command? The way I would rule it is that both creatures would have to obey the same command, but check with your Dungeon Master just in case. Heightened Spell, of course, would work really well here because it would ensure that the creatures fail their saving throw or the one creature fails their saving throw. Subtle Spell is always going to be good, especially in a social situation. This is something that clerics generally can't use command for, because when you cast a spell command, you have to issue the command, and therefore anyone around you is going to know that you're using magic to control someone's actions. If you use Subtle Spell, well, now you can command someone and they're not going to know who it was that did it. So for social situations, Subtle Spell really shines here with command. And if you twin it, now you're commanding two creatures, and no one knows that it was you who used it. And the other metamagic I'd recommend is Distance Spell, because it'll boost the range from 60 feet, which I don't like, to 120 feet, which is a much more comfortable range to be doing this from. There are no level 2 control spells that I'd recommend from the cleric spell list. So if you want to be casting control spells at the lower levels, look into the sorcerer spell list for some of those. There are some really good ones like web and all that. So look into those instead and check out my sorcerer spells video for level 2 spells. For level 3, I'd recommend Magic Circle. This is a really cool spell that has some great uses. Generally, it's going to be better at higher levels, since the types of creatures that it protects against are usually found at high tier 2 and tier 3 and 4. Don't take it at low or mid levels unless your campaign involves tons of fae, fiends, elementals, undead, or celestials. Otherwise, skip it. Maybe pick this spell up at a higher level. Now, I'm going to mention another level 3 spell, and when I said in the beginning that this video might trigger some people, this is probably the point where that's going to happen. There's a spell that I was going to put on the do not take list, and I feel like I kind of have to talk about it because it is so well loved by the community. And that is Spirit Guardians. It's a level 3 cleric spell. Basically what it does, it makes some spirits fly around you, and it slows creatures down because it creates difficult terrain and deals damage every round. Creatures have to save they're within the radius. They have to make a saving throw or take damage, and even if they succeed their save, they still take some damage. Now, some metamagic that works with Spirit Guardians, extended spell boosts the duration from 10 minutes to 20 minutes. And then, of course, Quicken spell will make it be a bonus action, so you can use your action to dash away or whatever if you're trying to get away from a melee. Now, this is a great control spell for clerics. I know that the comment section is going to be lit up here for what I'm about to say. I don't think this is a good spell for a sorcerer. And just to clarify what I said in the beginning of the video, it might be good for a multi-class sorcerer, but a straight sorcerer I do not think would benefit from this spell as much as you might think. To make the most of this spell, you're going to have to be in the middle of a melee, and that's a very dangerous proposition. And only the most experienced players can really pull this off consistently. Some of you are already typing that it's a good defensive spell for a sorcerer, but I'm going to respectfully disagree here. Spirit Guardians provides 0 defense. If you're far away from enemies, this spell doesn't add hit points, it doesn't reduce damage, or otherwise make it harder for you to get hit at all. If an enemy comes towards you, the difficult terrain and damage causes a creature to reconsider who to attack, sure, which makes this a little bit of a way to control. But other than that, it's not really a defensive spell at all. So unless enemies are approaching you in melee range every single combat, this spell is going to literally do nothing, and you've used a 3rd level spell slot, which is a costly resource. So why not just use a lower level defensive spell or Misty Step away, and then you can have your melee combatants deal with these creatures. A 3rd level spell is very expensive to be using just for some kind of defense that you might need once every 4 or 5 combats. Clerics usually stand up in the front lines and cast this spell to prevent enemies from running back to the casters in the party and then deal damage each round to those creatures. Clerics usually don't use this for defense either, so unless you're building to be up close and in melee range every combat, which I don't recommend, I'd actually recommend that you skip this spell for a Divine Soul Sorcerer. And in case you missed it at the beginning, I am not saying that this is not a good spell. What I'm saying is that this is not a good spell for most single class sorcerers, with very few exceptions. I'm going to repeat that this video intends to analyze these spells based on single class sorcerers, and that is what I'm basing this comment on. So you don't get a lot of good control options at low levels, but sorcerers are already the best controllers in the game. So if you're building a controller, lean on those at low levels. Lean on the sorcerer spell list on control. Command is the standout here for low level control, and it's a great spell to twin or heighten or even extend outside of combat or even within combat. So command is the big standout here for this group. The next group of spells I want to talk about are blast spells. At level 1, I'd recommend Guiding Bolt. This one is a pretty good blasting spell. It does 46 radiant, which is my favorite type of damage. What's also cool with this spell is the damage is decent, but if you land the hit, then the next attack against that creature is going to have advantage because that creature is left glowing. So that makes this spell a pretty good buff as well for your allies. So what you want to do is twin this spell because it's a level 1 spell. It only costs 1 sorcery point, and now you're hitting 2 creatures for 46 and potentially making them easier to hit for your allies next round. Seeking spell is going to be decent here because you're actually rolling an attack roll. So that very, very rarely good metamagic seeking spell is actually something that would be decent here. And distance spell boosts the range from 120 feet, which is already good, to 240 feet. You probably won't need to do that, but you never know. Now, some people have mentioned extended spell for Guiding Bolt. Extended spell doesn't really do much based on the text of the spell. I actually read an article online, and this is a website that specializes in optimizing characters for D&D, and they said that this will do damage for 2 rounds if you extend the spell. This spell does not work that way. So if you've read that article that I'm talking about, don't believe it. This spell will not do damage for 2 rounds if you use extended spell with it. Another great level 1 spell if you want to choose a blast spell is Inflict Wounds. This one deals a really good amount of damage and it scales really well. This is an awesome spell, and what keeps this spell from being really powerful is the fact that it requires you to touch your target in order to deal the damage to them. Now, in this case, you are a sorcerer, so you do have metamagics that can help you with that. First of all, Twin Spell is fantastic because Inflict Wounds already deals a lot of damage. Now, if you twin it, you can target 2 creatures and deal a ton of damage to 2 creatures. And then, of course, you can use Distance Spell, and you change the range from touch to 30 feet. And that makes it actually where you can stay a little bit further away. Of course, 30 feet is not a tremendous distance, so you definitely have to be careful. And if you're dealing this much damage, you're going to become a target. So be careful when you do this. But this could be a really powerful maneuver here if you use Distance Spell with Twin Spell. And it's only going to cost you 2 sorcery points in order to pull off a twin distant maneuver with this spell. Now, some people might say Seeking Spell is also going to be good on this one. Unfortunately, it's not. Seeking Spell doesn't work on this spell because the wording of the spell says to make a melee spell attack roll, and Seeking Spell unfortunately does not work on melee spell attack rolls, so that's too bad. But yeah, I would say Inflict Wounds is a great spell, and if you're able to take a feat that'll grant you the Find Familiar spell, then even better, you can actually get to cast Inflict Wounds through your familiar, extending the range beyond even 30 feet if you wanted to do that. And I don't recommend any more level 2 or level 3 blast spells, but there is another spell that might trigger people listening to this video, and I will talk about it right now, and that is Spiritual Weapon. So the Spiritual Weapon is a level 2 spell. Basically, it's a bonus action to cast, and it brings out a floating spiritual weapon that can attack, and you can use it as a bonus action every round to attack enemies and deal a little bit of damage. The damage type is good. The damage is okay. You know, any extra damage is always welcome. Spiritual Weapon works great with Distance Spell. You can extend it from 1 minute to 2 minutes, which not as great. So I don't recommend this spell if you chose the Quicken Spell Metamagic, because this spell is going to eat up your bonus action every single round. I found this spell to be a bit overhyped, to be honest, even in non-sorcerers, even as a cleric. It's an okay spell, but at least in games that I played, creatures you fight don't just sit in one place the entire fight. And even if they do, usually we fight multiple creatures, and rarely are they within 20 feet of each other. So I found that in most combats, maybe you'll get 1 or 2 attacks out of this spell, and then you try to move it, and it only moves 20 feet, and it can't dash. So you're not going to be able to reach another creature for 1 round, and then that's a round wasted, a round of damage that you could have been doing, right? So it would have been much better if it can move more than 20 foot in a round. Even 30 foot would have made a bigger difference. And I'm going to rant about this spell in detail in a spell focused video in the future, once I get to the cleric spell videos. So overall, I think you might benefit from Spiritual Weapon depending on your particular character, but I don't think it's the all-out auto-include like a lot of people say. Spiritual Weapon is most definitely not an auto-include for a Divine Soul Sorcerer, and it might not deal as much damage as you might think in the course of your adventuring career. To summarize, I don't think Divine Soul Sorcerers excel at blasting, but sorcerers are good blasters out of the box. So you do get the sorcerer spells to help you out and round out your blasting. Guiding Bolt is a good single target blast spell, but it's also a great debuff as well, so you get the best of both worlds there. And I would say that is probably the standout for your low-level blasting spells. So I'm not sure if you've seen the pattern so far, but the cleric spell list has so many good low-level spells that it might even be a good idea to pick up a few more than you normally would as a sorcerer. The next group of spells I want to talk about are debuff spells. So at level 1, there's only one spell, and that is Bane. Bane is often overlooked because Bless is such a good buff spell. But if you want to go for debuff because your party's already pretty well buffed, or you might already have a cleric in the party that can cast Bless, then Bane is a great option to choose here. You can extend the range. The range normally for this spell is pretty bad at 30 feet, but you extend the range to 60 feet. Now you can affect 3 creatures within a 60-foot radius of you, which is pretty great. Heightened Spell will ensure that Bane hits and lands, and of course Quicken Spell will allow you to use an action that round in addition to casting the spell. For level 2, there's a couple of good debuffs. Blindness, Deafness is a great spell. Blindness, Deafness does not require concentration and has a pretty good duration. The creatures that you target are blind and deaf, which gives them disadvantage to attack, and your allies are going to have advantage to attack them. So, of course, Twin Spell is one that stands out here because you can target 2 creatures with Blindness, Deafness. Heightened Spell, of course, will ensure that the Blindness, Deafness lands, and Distance Spell boosts the pretty crappy range from 30 foot to 60 feet. The other level 2 spell I'd recommend for debuffs is Silence. Silence is a great spell against spellcasters or any creature that has some kind of vocal attack like Banshees. Silence is fantastic in certain situations and against certain types of enemies. Distance spell boosts the range from 120 feet to 240 feet. That is actually really, really good. There are times where I say 120 feet is more than enough, but for something like Silence, I think the extended range could really come in handy. And then Extended Spell would boost the duration from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, which is still so-so, because most of the time you're probably going to want to use it in combat. Though, of course, there are plenty of times outside of combat where having a Silence in an area could really benefit the group. For example, if you're trying to infiltrate a place and break into some place and you're smashing doors, casting Silence is a really great utility spell in addition to being a debuff, because you can actually prevent others from hearing you breaking into a certain building or whatnot. So don't overlook the utility functions of a spell like Silence. There are plenty of things that you can do with it even outside of combat. Now, all that said, the Metamagic I didn't mention here, because it is probably the best one that you want to take if you want to take this spell, is the Subtle Spell Metamagic. With Subtle Spell, you can silence an area and then battle spellcasters with only you being able to cast spells with verbal components. It's kind of like the Warlock Devil Sight Darkness combo. If you're not familiar with that combo, then basically it's Warlocks that take Devil Sight can see through magical darkness, so they'll cast darkness so no one can see except for them. Well, in this case, this is kind of like that, but with sound. So you cast Silence and no one can speak except for you with Subtle Spell. So with Subtle Spell, you're still going to be able to cast all of your spells, while any spellcaster in the area is going to be SOL. They're not going to be able to cast any spells. So that would be a really cool combo if you're able to pull it off. For level 3, the one spell I would recommend is Bestow Curse. This spell basically allows you to choose some effects on a target. So basically you cast it on a target, they have to make a wisdom saving throw, or they are cursed for the duration, which is 1 minute. And of course you can extend that to 2 minutes with Extended Spell. You can choose an ability score and have disadvantage on that. You can have them get disadvantage on attack rolls against you. You can have them make a wisdom saving throw at the start of their turns, and if they fail, they waste an action and do nothing. Or they take an extra D8 necrotic damage when you attack the target with spells or attack rolls. I think the best choice for a single class Divine Soul Sorcerer is the one where they have to make a wisdom saving throw or waste their action doing nothing for that turn. That is huge. That's basically turns this into a control spell. Outside of combat, I think a really good option is choosing the ability score and giving someone disadvantage. So there's some really cool metamagics that you can combine with this. Twin Spell, it's a bit expensive at 3 sorcery points, but you can bestow Curse on 2 creatures at the same time, which actually could be pretty impactful. Having 2 creatures waste their action every turn doing nothing is tremendous. You've taken them out of the combat. It's kind of like twinning command, you know. Heightened Spell would make them get the disadvantage on their saving throw, which would ensure that this lands. And then Distance Spell, tremendously useful here because Bestow Curse is a touch spell. That really sucks, so at least it'll extend it to 30 feet, making it a little bit more of a safe option to use. So outside of combat, you can also do Subtle Spell, which will basically allow you to bestow Curse on 1 or maybe 2 targets, giving them disadvantage on ability scores or ability checks, and then use some kind of social manipulation, persuasion, or intimidation, and give them disadvantage on their ability checks against that kind of thing. Give them disadvantage on their perception rolls if you're trying to pick their pocket, that kind of stuff. So some outside of combat uses for Bestow Curse using Subtle Spell. That's really, really cool. I don't recommend that you pick the one where the creature gets disadvantage on attacks against you, because that's using your concentration. If you're going to use your concentration to give disadvantage on attacks, pick Blur from the Sorcerer spell list instead, because that'll get disadvantage from all creatures trying to attack you, not just one creature. So much, much better. And then the extra damage option is something that I don't recommend either for a single class sorcerer. The extra damage is really low, and most of the time you're going to be just dealing 1d8 extra damage. That's just not worth it. It would be better if all attacks that your allies make would deal an extra d8. That would be maybe a little too strong, but at least allow you to choose whose attacks deal extra damage. That would have been good. So the one that makes them lose their action is probably the most powerful, and twinning it would make it even more powerful. So the Cleric debuff spells are just plain great. Level 1 has Bane, Level 2 has Blindness and Deafness, and also Silence. Level 3 has Bestow Curse. When choosing debuff spells, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of them require concentration though, so except for like Blindness, Deafness. So when making decisions on which ones to pick, I would first look at concentration spells in your known spell list. Then I'd consider how many debuff spells I have that target multiple foes like Bane and that kind of stuff, and how many of them are single target. Also, if you took Twin Spell, single target debuffs become much better than they normally are, so factor that in as well. The next group of spells I want to talk about are defensive spells. So for level 1, there are quite a few actually. We've got Protection from Evil and Good. That one gives disadvantage to certain creature types to attack you. That is really, really handy as a defense. Of course, you can use Twin Spell because you can target someone else. You don't have to use it on yourself. So if you Twin Spell, now you can have 2 creatures that are protected from evil and good. Distance Spell extends the range from touch to 30 feet, which is really nice. And of course, Quickened Spell. Extended Spell actually can come in handy because if you're doing some dungeon exploration, extending the duration from 10 minutes to 20 minutes can make a big difference here. The next level 1 spell that I'd recommend is Sanctuary. This spell is really cool because it can protect a party member from getting attacked. And even better, that it doesn't take concentration. So you cast Sanctuary on someone, and as long as they're not attacking or casting spells on enemies, then the enemies aren't going to be able to attack them unless they succeed on a Wisdom saving throw. And even better is that you can twin the spell for only 1 sorcery point and help 2 allies become protected. It's a bonus action as well, so this is huge. You bonus action cast this spell, twinning it, and that's a huge value for your action economy. I highly recommend the spell if you're a buffer or a healer, or if you have a buffer or a healer in your party, because generally Sanctuary goes away if the person who you cast it on makes an attack roll against their enemy or casts a spell on the enemy, but it says nothing about casting a spell on your allies. So you could be healing your allies, walking into the middle of a melee, and be protected from getting attacked. You can cast it on a buffer, so you can have the cleric in the party buff the allies while you heal the allies, or vice versa, and neither of you are going to get attacked by enemies unless those enemies succeed on a Wisdom saving throw. That's pretty huge and pretty awesome tactics in combat that you can use if you have a particular party member that doesn't necessarily attack or debuff enemies or control enemies. The final level 1 spell I'd recommend is Shield of Faith. This one gives a bonus to armor class to whoever you cast it on. Again, it's great that these cleric spells allow you to cast it on others. A lot of these sorcerer and wizard defensive spells are very selfish because they only work on yourself. A lot of the cleric defensive spells work on others, so that's really cool that you can help your party and buff your party with these. So Shield of Faith will give a bonus to armor class to whoever you cast it on. Of course, using Twin Spell would only cost you 1 sorcery point, which is really huge. And again, this is a bonus action spell, which again is great for your action economy. You can use Distance Spell to extend this, and then you can also use Extended Spell to boost the duration from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, which again, while you're in a dungeon, can make a big difference. For level 2, Gentle Repose is a great spell. This one allows you to help your allies and prevent them from rising as undead, and it helps them remain basically able to be revived if necessary without any dire consequences. It's kind of a situational spell, so I don't highly recommend it because you have so few spells known, but do know that it's there, and depending on your build, you might have room for it. So if you do, definitely pick it up. Unfortunately, Extended Spell doesn't work on it because the duration of this spell is 10 days. So Extended Spell only works on a spell up to 24 hours. So you're not going to be able to double it to 20 days. Now, Quickened and Twin Spell, that can come in really handy. If your party is in trouble, then you can Twin Spell Gentle Repose. Now, if you're having to do that, then your party's in real trouble, but you never know. And then Distance Spell would extend it from touch to 30 foot, which definitely can come in handy. The next level 2 spell I'd recommend is Protection from Poison. Poison is such a common damage type that you actually can certainly find use with this at least every other session, I would say, depending on your campaign. But for the most part, I think Poison is common enough that you will encounter it pretty frequently. This one allows you to remove a poison from someone who's poisoned. And if they're not poisoned, then for the duration of the spell, they have advantage against poison on their saving throws, and they also have resistance from poison damage. So pretty handy spell. It's a touch spell, so you can use Distance Spell to boost it to 30 feet, and you can extend it. This one's really good because you would extend it from 1 hour to 2 hours. That can really come in handy. Of course, you can quicken it, and you can use Twin Spell, which is really good for 2 sorcery points. You can affect 2 creatures and protect them, which, that's great because poison is one of the most common damage types in the game, besides bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. So it's a good spell if protection is what you're building around. And the best part is that it doesn't take concentration. So if you're using this spell, you can actually combine it with other defensive options, and that's going to be really, really good. The final level 2 spell that I want to talk about is Warning Bond. This one is normally a spell that I would say I wouldn't recommend for characters that are very squishy like a sorcerer, because what it does, it gives a +1 to armor class to whoever your target is, and any damage they take half of that damage. They have resistance basically to damage, and then you take the other half of that damage. So you basically find a target and you can actually boost their survivability. Now, there are some combos you can do with this. You can twin it, and you can extend it from 1 hour to 2 hours with Extended Spell, and then you can have 2 creatures protected, and you'll be taking half the damage of each of those creatures takes. Now, you don't have a lot of hit points as a Divine Soul Sorcerer, so only do this if you're an experienced player. But if you want to pull off some crazy combos, maybe pick a half-orc, and then you can actually, if you drop down to 0, you drop down to 1 instead. So you can use that, or at later levels, if you have the spell Death Ward, you can cast Death Ward on yourself and then give resistance to all damage to 2 party members by using Twin Spell, and they're going to have resistance to all damage. You're going to be taking some damage, but then you're Death Warded, and if you're half-orc and you Death Ward, you can really get some mileage out of this spell. So some crazy combos, but these are kind of things that I think only experienced players should try and pull off, but just know that it is something that you can do with that spell, which is the crazy shenanigans. So for defensive self, the Sorcerer spell list has some very good options already. So most cleric defense spells are best used on others, except for, I would say, Sanctuary. That one's always going to be good for you. The standouts here are mostly the level 1 spells again. Shield of Faith, Protection from Evil and Good, and Sanctuary are all really, really great spells, and most work great with Twin Spell, since it would only cost 1 sorcery point to double your targets and your benefits. The last group of spells I want to talk about are the healing spells. So there's a few of these because, of course, it's the cleric spell list, right? So at level 1, Cure Wounds, of course, one of the better level 1 healing spells because it heals a little bit more than most of the others. You can use Distance Spell, so instead of it being a touch spell, now you can actually cast it from 30 feet. That is tremendous. You can twin the spell, so you can cure 2 creatures for the cost of 1 sorcery point. That's a very good value as well. And of course, you can quicken it and do an action while you're healing someone, which is always a gripe that clerics have. They're always having to waste actions healing people, and then they don't get to do the other things. So in this case, as a sorcerer, Divine Soul, you can totally do that. Healing Word is basically Cure Wounds, but I think overall better, because even though it doesn't heal as much, you do have the ability to cast it from a range from 60 feet, and it's a bonus action. So you get to get that action economy out of it. So you obviously can't quicken it because it's already a bonus action, but you can twin it. So you can twin Healing Word to targets up to 60 feet. And if you have Distance Spell, you can even extend that to 120 feet. The first healing spell I want to talk about for level 2 is Aid. Aid is such a good spell. It's a great spell in Clerics, and it's even better in the Divine Soul Sorcerer. The Divine Soul can make this spell leagues better than a Cleric can. First of all, the Metamagic I'd recommend with this spell is Extended Spell. A huge benefit of being able to cast it using Extended Spell is if you cast it before you take a long rest. So you have the benefits of Aid, but no expended spell slots or sorcery points, because basically how it works is you cast Aid before you take a long rest on the group. Aid lasts 8 hours, and if you extend it, you're going to use some sorcery points to extend it to 16 hours. But now you've taken a long rest, so you've regained the spell slot you cast Aid with, even if you upcast it, and you've regained the sorcery points you spent to extend it. So you have all your resources, but you still have the benefits of Aid, which means everybody gets additional bonus hit points added to their maximum. It's not even temporary hit points. These are actual hit points that are added to the creature's maximums. So you can cast it, on your entire party and have your entire party boost their hit points for the entire adventuring day, and you'll still have all of your resources, none expended. Aid also works with Quicken Spell, but I don't recommend it. I mean, if you're going to take Aid, definitely take Extended Spell and just use it that way. I don't even want to talk about any other metamagics with this spell, because you really shouldn't even be casting it except right before a long rest and using the Extended Spell trick with it. So definitely take advantage of that if you did want to pick that spell up. The next spell for healing that I want to talk about at level 2 is Lesser Restoration. Of course, this is a great spell that's going to help remove effects and status conditions from your allies. They're always going to be thankful when you do that for them. And of course, you can twin the spell for 2 sorcery points and remove the ill effects from 2 characters. And you can distance spell, so if it's in the middle of a combat and you want to be able to use the restoration right away, distance spell, and you increase the range from touch to 30 feet, which can come in handy. And as always, Quicken Spell is going to be pretty handy here, especially in a combat. Prayer of Healing is the next level 2 spell that I want to talk about for healing. This one, you can use Distance Spell to boost the range from 30 to 60 feet. That's not something that you're probably ever going to want to use, because Prayer of Healing is an outside of combat healing spell. This is a spell that has a very long casting time. You're not going to be able to cast it in combat, so you're probably not going to want to use any metamagics on it. This spell is okay for clerics, but with limited spells known, I don't think that this one is a great choice for Divine Soul. But if you want to focus on healing tremendously, then it might be a pickup that you'll consider taking. For level 3, the first spell that I want to talk about is Life Transference. This one, basically, you take some damage and then you heal double that amount of damage from someone else. So it's a good way for you to heal an ally that's in the front lines taking a ton of damage. If you haven't taken any damage, which can happen a lot as a spellcaster, then you can at least use your life as a resource. Just be careful if you're concentrating on a spell. This spell will force a concentration check because you've taken damage, and probably quite a bit of damage. So you might lose concentration on whatever it is that you're concentrating on. So always keep that in mind. Now, Quicken Spell is going to make this a bonus action, which will leave your action up for drinking a healing potion if you wanted to do that. Now, ask your Dungeon Master if they'll allow Twin Spell to work. The wording of the spell is a little wonky, so by raw, I would rule that it doesn't work with Twin Spell, but some DMs may disagree with me and give you an amazing healing spell if you can twin it, which would mean that you take damage 1 time and you heal twice that amount from 2 characters. That would be insanely good and make this one of the best healing spells in the game. So I doubt that your Dungeon Masters will allow that, but if they do, take full advantage of it. Now, that said, I only recommend this spell if you have a high constitution and you take the tough feat, because that'll boost your hit points and your survivability. Otherwise, this one's going to be pretty risky to pull off, so you are probably not going to be using this very consistently. The other thing you can do is pull off the same trick that I talked about earlier with Warding Bond. You can use Life Transference if you're a half-orc, and if you're low on hit points and your party is kind of struggling here, use Life Transference. You'll still drop to 1 hit point. Even if you had 5 hit points left, you can take 20 points of damage and still drop back down to 1 and heal 40 points from a character, which can turn the tide in a combat. So it's not without its merits. The next healing spell I want to talk about for level 3 is Mass Healing Word. This spell is basically Healing Word, but it allows you to heal multiple characters with 1 casting. The only metamagic that I'd recommend here with this one is Distance Spell, because you can boost the range from 60 feet to 120 feet, which is definitely going to be something you're going to want to do often. Generally, you're not going to be within 60 feet of every party member that you want to heal, so having Distance Spell when picking this spell is probably going to be very handy. The next healing spell I want to talk about for level 3 is Remove Curse. This spell can be good in certain campaigns. In my experience, curses are not a major element of most 5e games, but if you do decide to take this, Twin Spell can be great. Distance Spell can increase the range from touch to 30 feet, so it's very campaign dependent, but overall I would say skip it. But I did want to talk about it because there are some campaigns where you may be dealing with that quite a bit. And the last spell I wanted to talk about for healing at level 3 is Revivify. This is a good spell. It can basically bring back a recently deceased ally. 300 gold is a low cost for what it does, to be honest. And with Twin Spell, you can revive 2 creatures for the same cost, so you get some value out of that. But I'm going to say this again and again. Even though this is great for a cleric, as a sorcerer, you might want to skip it, because you have limited known spells, and in most campaigns, you're not going to encounter player death, but once in every several sessions, if ever at all. So this spell is going to pretty much sit there taking a spot that could have been used for a spell that you would use every session, let's say. There are exceptions, of course. Some tables play very deadly campaigns, and this would be great there. But in my experience, if you're playing a deadly campaign, usually this spell is not going to be allowed anyways. So as expected, there are a lot of good cleric healing spells. A lot of them require touch, so Distance Spell is a great metamagic choice if you're looking to maximize the use of healing spells. Healing Word with Twin Spell can turn the tide of battle if you have 2 party members go down. And Aid is just so good, and with Extended Spell, it becomes a permanent boost to your entire party's hit point maximum. For level 3, Mass Healing Word is the spell that you're actually going to want to use your Empowered Healing subclass ability on, which allows you to reroll dice, healing dice. If you've rolled poorly, then it can really boost the Mass Healing Word here. And the final 2 groups of spells are going to be very small. The first one is Mobility. There's only one spell that I'd recommend, and it's a level 3 spell, and that is Water Walk. And I'd only recommend this if your campaign deals with a lot of water or is a seafaring type of campaign. It's situational, yes, but in those types of campaigns, it's not situational, so it could be really good. Not a lot of mobility options for clerics, and that's not surprising. So if you're looking for good mobility spells, look into the Sorcerer spell list. You remember, you have full access to both spell lists, which is ridiculously insane. So you always have a way to find a mobility option if you're looking for one. Spells like Expeditious Retreat at level 1 or Misty Step at level 2, and of course Fly at level 3. Water Walk is a little too situational to recommend unless you're playing on a water-based campaign. The final group of spells that I wanted to talk about is Summoning. The only one available here is Animate Dead, and that's a level 3 spell. The only metamagic that I would recommend for use with it is Subtle Spell. I can think of a few social interaction uses for this. For example, if you're talking to the king in the middle of their best soldier's funeral, and you can animate it, and if you use Subtle Spell, well, that soldier just came back to life as an undead, and no one knows why. So, some very situational options and uses for Subtle Spell, but you never know, it can come in really handy. So this spell, even regardless of whether you're going to use Subtle Spell with it or not, it's still a fantastic spell. It's one of the few summoning type spells that you get as a sorcerer, and it is a really good spell. Even though it's not specifically a summon spell, this is a very good spell that can help with utility and battlefield control. What's even better is you can pair this with Sanctuary, and you're going to be able to enjoy the benefits of Sanctuary while your zombie servants grapple enemies, shove, they can tank damage, or even attack. And some of you might disagree with the wording of Sanctuary, but once you've animated the dead creature, that is a separate creature. So by raw, you cast Sanctuary on yourself, you are not attacking anyone. You're commanding your creature to attack someone, and therefore Sanctuary will still remain active while your zombies do all the work of grappling and attacking. I think that this is one of the best spells that you can take as a Divine Soul Sorcerer, and it's phenomenal. And not just in combat, you can use them for exploration as well, because they can go out and find traps and trigger traps and maybe take all the damage from trapped dungeons or, false terrain and things like that. So you can send them out to explore ahead and not put your party in danger. And of course, sorcerers don't get a lot of summoning, which are always really handy types of spells. Some don't get any summoning at all, except for animate objects. And I think summon spells are some of the most versatile spells in the game. So whenever I can get one, I always give it a second look. Animate Dead happens to be a very good spell, and if you're playing a Divine Soul, I think there needs to be a very good reason why if you decide not to take it. So I'm going to list off the rest of the cleric spells that I don't recommend. I'm just going to list them, and I don't think that I need to explain why I don't recommend them. Most of them are situational spells. Most of them are spells that you won't benefit from with Metamagic, and most of them are spells that, well, they're better off in a cleric or a multi-class character. So for level 1, Ceremony, Create or Destroy Water, Detect Evil and Good, Detect Magic, Detect Poison and Disease, Purify Food and Drink. Those are all the level 1 spells I'd say skip. A lot of them are also ritual spells, which you don't have the ability to do. So therefore, why take a spell that would normally be a free casting for another class when you have to spend a spell slot to use it, right? For level 2, the ones I don't recommend are Augury, Continual Flame, Find Traps, terrible spell, Locate Object, Zone of Truth. Locate Object, I know some of you are going to say it's a very good spell, and I agree, it's a very good spell. Zone of Truth, also a very good spell, but let the clerics cast those. Let someone else cast those. As a sorcerer, you have limited capability, limited known spells, and you can't afford to take situational or utility spells like those two. And for level 3, the ones I don't recommend, Create Food and Water, Feign Death, Glyph of Warding, Meld into Stone, Sending, and Speak with the Dead. Spirit Shroud, also, some of you might say that's a pretty good spell. It is a decent spell, and it's a bonus action spell, and it lasts a minute. But as a sorcerer, you probably won't be making a lot of attacks. So dealing extra damage on attacks is better on a melee-based type of character, or like a cleric, especially with the arrow that slows the enemies down. I'd say go ahead and skip this one. And also, I would skip Tongues. Tongues is a great spell. I love that spell, but I'd rather take it on the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. But as a Divine Soul Sorcerer, it's too much of a utility spell to be able to justify. And now that we've reached near the end of the video, I do want to summarize my picks for low-level standouts. That's the levels 1, 2, and 3 for the Divine Soul Sorcerer spells. When I say I recommend them, I'm not saying this is your spell list, pick all of these. I'm saying while you're making your character, based on your character concept, take a second look at some of these, because these are the ones that really stand out for a sorcerer. So here we go. Bane, Bless, Healing Word, Guiding Bolt, Protection from Evil and Good, Sanctuary, and Shield of Faith. For level 2 spells, I would say Aid, Blindness, Deafness, and Silence. And for level 3 spells, Bestow Curse, Animate Dead, and Mass Healing Word. Of course, based on your build, some other spells that I didn't mention here will probably be very good, especially if you're multi-classing. Then some of the spells that I even said are pretty bad might become good, but that's beyond the scope of this video. And as you can see, this is already almost an hour long. So if I were to go into detail with every multi-class combination, we would never get out of here. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to just focus on single class here. And that does it for today's video on the Divine Soul Sorcerer spells. Be sure to tune in for part 2, where I talk about the mid-level spells. That would be levels 4, 5, and 6. And then I will have a final video for the level 7, 8, and 9 spells. So tune in for those as I release those over the next few weeks. And if you have any comments or questions, don't forget to leave them down there in the comments down below. As always, I'm your Innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.